Rachel was in a hurry to get home. She had left just half an hour ago to buy medicine for her little son, Ethan. After standing in line for what felt like forever, waiting for the pharmacist to finish with an elderly lady, she finally managed to get the needed remedy and rush back. In addition to her 10-month-old Ethan, she had 2 other children to care for. With 3 kids, she was often seen as a mother of many, receiving some financial support from the state. However, it never felt like enough. At home, her eldest son, Henry, who had just turned 9, was looking after the younger ones. The brave boy did his best to help his mother, changing diapers, feeding Ethan, putting him to sleep, and singing lullabies. Along with her responsibilities at home, Rachel had to go to her shift at the hospital that day. She worked as a nurse. Her entire family depended on her. Just 3 months ago, her husband, Michael, had tragically died after being hit by a car while crossing the street. Rachel was devastated, left alone with 3 children. But soon, she pulled herself together and carried on. She wouldn't dare leave her kids with the neighbors, who were mostly alcoholics or shady individuals asking her for money to drink or complaining about their miserable lives. Rachel had tried to reason with them, but it was clear that her own problems were less than theirs. These marginalized people didn't even realize how far they were sinking. These were the characters she had to live next to. Despite that, she grew accustomed to them and taught her children to keep their distance. As she rushed to get home, Rachel didn't notice she was about to cross the street in a dangerous spot. It almost led to the same fate as her husband, but at the last moment, someone grabbed her by the sleeve of her coat. She turned to see an elderly woman in tattered, shabby clothes. It was obvious she was a beggar. The woman had appeared out of nowhere and yanked Rachel back just as a car sped by. The driver didn't even think of slowing down, even though he was well aware he was in the city and not on a highway. Sighing, Rachel lowered her head in guilt. The woman who saved her looked to be around 60. She adjusted her scarf and looked at Rachel with a heavy gaze. "Why are you running so fast? Do you want to rush to the other world?" she asked reproachfully. Blushing from surprise, and perhaps from shame for her reckless actions, Rachel quietly replied, "No, I was just hurrying home to deliver medicine. My youngest child is sick, and I have 3 in total. There's no one else to care for them properly." The beggar shook her head and suggested that Rachel take a seat on a bench near the bus stop. Unlike most homeless people, she didn't smell bad. In fact, Rachel noticed she seemed to take care of herself. Her nails were clean, and her teeth looked decent. It seemed like this woman had accidentally become homeless. Expressing sympathy for Rachel's tough family situation, the woman offered her help. "Dear, maybe I can assist you," she said. "Are you serious?" Rachel asked, frowning her thick eyebrows. "Of course. I love kids," she replied with a smile. "By the way, my name is Martha. It's nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too," Rachel began, but Martha interrupted. "Don't judge me by my poor clothes. It's a separate story I'll tell you someday. And don't be afraid of me. I won't steal anything from you or harm your kids." However, Rachel still had doubts about this woman since she had never seen her before and didn't know what she really did. Rachel felt perplexed, unsure whether to accept Martha's offer or decline. A stranger stood before her, yet the kindness in her elderly eyes was unmistakable. Those eyes seemed to show a depth of understanding, as if someone very close to her was looking back. Thoughts swirled in Rachel's mind. What if she accepted? Would there be a catch? On the other hand, Rachel was in a desperate situation. There really was no one to look after her children. Even her friend couldn't help her, having turned her down for a date. After weighing her options, Rachel decided to accept Martha's proposal. She felt she had no other choice. She needed to be at work that day. 20 minutes later, they arrived at Rachel's apartment, which showed her industriousness. Martha looked around and said, "It's cozy and warm here." "We try our best," Rachel shrugged. "Come on in. Let's have some tea." The children came out of their room when they heard the noise in the hallway. The children immediately rushed over, asking, "Oh, are you okay, Granny?" Tears filled Martha's eyes as she pulled a handkerchief from her pocket to wipe her face. Noticing her agitation, Rachel playfully responded to the kids, "Yes, this is Grandma, but just for an hour." The children didn't quite understand what for an hour meant, but the important part was that they heard the word Grandma. They all smiled and hugged the elderly woman, who nearly cried again from the surprise but managed to hold it together. Soon after, little Ethan took his medicine and started to feel a bit better. Rachel checked his temperature just to be safe, and fortunately, it wasn't critical. After pouring some tea for Martha, she began preparing for work, giving her a few instructions. "If Ethan's temperature goes up again, just give him the fever-reducing syrup," she explained. "Okay, I got it. You don't have to worry about anything," Martha replied, nodding. "I'll take care of everything. All the medicines are on the shelf in the cabinet," Rachel continued, pointing to the glass cabinets. "If you want something to eat, there's soup and meatballs with pasta in the fridge. There's also formula on the table in the kitchen. Ethan knows where it is. Everything will be fine. I didn't come here for the food," Martha tried to reassure her. "You can go to work and not worry about a thing." Rachel nodded, but in her mind, she thought, "How can I not worry? These are my children." Still, something told her she didn't need to be concerned. Martha seemed incapable of causing harm to anyone. With that thought in mind, Rachel set off for work, feeling confident that everything would be fine at home. As she walked to the hospital, troubling thoughts about her life after her husband's death clouded her mind. It was tough for Rachel with no one to turn to for support. Among her acquaintances, there were no individuals who could provide the help she needed. She often found herself in dead-end situations, having to find her way out on her own. Rachel couldn't bear to think what would happen if she ever gave up. Most likely, life's challenges would crush her, and her children would end up in an orphanage. But she had managed to avoid that fate, largely thanks to her late husband, Michael, who, despite being an orphan himself, always knew how to find a way out of tough situations. She recalled a time when they desperately needed to pay for their eldest son's treatment. Rachel had called all her acquaintances but couldn't raise the necessary funds. Michael had then struck a deal with their neighbor to help finish his summer house, earning enough money for the medicine. He had been so kind and selfless for their child. Rachel thought about that now as she considered who would care for the children. She pushed aside her principles and worries. Her parents had long since become alcoholics, making it pointless to expect help from them. Even when they were sober, her mother had told her, "You got married, so you've grown up. Figure it out and don't bother us." How could she hope for help after that? With these heavy thoughts swirling in her mind, Rachel hurried to work. No matter how fast she walked, she still arrived late at the reception desk. Dr. Caldwell greeted her with a stern look. "This is disappointing. Where have you been? If this happens again, I'll fire you or dock your bonuses." Rachel nearly cried in response. "I'm sorry, Dr. Caldwell. It won't happen again." Making a mental note of her fate, Rachel hurried to her locker. Her partner Lydia, who had started working there just a couple of months ago, was already changing her clothes. When she saw Rachel panting, she greeted her with a smile. "Hey, why are you breathing so hard? Were wolves chasing you or something?" "Yeah, something like that," Rachel replied with a shake of her head. "I was running to work hoping to make it on time, but ended up being late." "Of course," Lydia replied. "Dr. Caldwell was in the reception room, and he gave me a hard time, threatening to fire me if I was late again." "That guy," Lydia said sadly. "Listen, I keep meaning to ask, who do you leave the kids with when you go to work?" "Usually with Henry, my oldest son," Rachel answered. "But today a woman is helping me. I met her by chance on the street. She looked like a beggar, but she saved me from a near-death experience. I was about to cross the road in the wrong place, and a car almost hit me. What a stroke of luck." "So what happened next? Did you invite her to your home?" "Yes, we agreed that she would take care of the kids tonight. Martha seemed like an honest woman. I didn't see her documents, but she looks about 60. I doubt someone her age could do anything bad." "Oh, You naive thing. Lydia shook her head in disapproval. Are you really leaving your kids with just anyone? She probably already robbed your place, and the kids are wandering around hungry, calling for their mom. No, she won't do that, Rachel insisted, shaking her head. Okay, do as you wish. Let's get to work. Otherwise, Dr. Caldwell really will fire us. In truth, they didn't have much to fear about being fired, as the job of a hospital orderly took all their strength and nerves. The pay was meager, and there weren't many people in town who wanted to care for sick patients. But there wasn't much choice in the matter, so they worked where they could at least earn a steady paycheck. While Lydia started washing the floors in the hallway, Rachel headed to the wards to turn over bedridden patients and change bedpans. Her thoughts continued to drift back to her children, and her colleagues' doubts about Martha nagged at her like a splinter. Rachel began to worry that something might really have happened to her kids. At one point, she even found herself considering that her friend might be right. Yet her intuition whispered that her worries were unfounded, urging her to stop spiraling into emotional turmoil. Just then, she nearly tripped over a pair of abandoned slippers near one of the beds. She managed to catch herself, but the bedpan clattered loudly to the floor. The elderly woman in the adjacent bed grumbled and called for the doctor. A few minutes later, Dr. Caldwell arrived, asking, "What's going on? Why the noise? Get your orderly under control. She won't let me rest," muttered the old woman. "What happened, Rachel?" The doctor inquired sternly. "I just didn't see someone's slippers and almost fell. The bedpan slipped from my hands, causing a ruckus in the whole ward," she explained. "All right, I'm giving you a warning. Keep working," he said, wagging his finger at her before leaving the ward. The incident was over, but Rachel felt a bitter taste in her mouth. She had been scolded for simply trying to do her job. Once again, she realized that being an orderly was a thankless role. As she exited the ward, she leaned against the wall and quietly shed a few tears. Lydia noticed her while washing the floor and asked, "What happened to you? You look like you've had a rough day." "I got caught in the crossfire," Rachel replied through her tears, sharing what had transpired in the ward. "They have no conscience at all. They could at least say thank you." Lydia shook her head. At their age, it's pretty expected. Some of them aren't even happy to have lived this long. "You're right," Rachel agreed, feeling a little calmer. "Sometimes I imagine myself old, and it almost makes me feel sorry for them. It's really tough for them, and we can't fully grasp their struggles." Their discussion about the incident ended abruptly when Dr. Caldwell reappeared, staring intently at them. Lydia resumed washing the floors, while Rachel continued her rounds. It turned out that the doctor had feelings for Rachel and even attempted to court her, mentioning his children and wife while hinting at wanting her as his mistress. Rachel was aware of this and consistently rejected his advances. She had no desire to become a kept woman or be involved with such an unstable and, more importantly, married man. It was hard to expect anything good from him. Dr. Caldwell was frustrated because he couldn't understand why Rachel resisted him. He offered her his love and gifts, promising to take care of her. "I'll do everything for you," he would say when they were alone. "No, thanks. I'd rather be alone," she would respond, shaking her head in refusal. Rachel knew she had only encouraged him, but she couldn't even consider associating with a married man. After completing their rounds, she joined Lydia, and together they quickly finished cleaning the floors. Back in their room, Lydia said, "I advise you not to pay any attention to Dr. Caldwell. If you mean his threats, I've already forgotten everything." Rachel waved her hand dismissively. "Let's eat some more fresh gingerbread. They haven't gone stale yet," she suggested, slowly carrying out their tasks. Rachel didn't even notice that the end of her shift was approaching until she glanced at the clock and muttered, "Another workday has passed." "Did you say something, Rachel?" Dr. Caldwell unexpectedly approached her from behind. "Yes, I'm glad everything is in order with the patients," Rachel replied confidently and without hesitation. "Of course they are under my watchful eye," he said proudly. Rachel simply nodded, barely containing her urge to laugh. It seemed he was trying to prove he was the best doctor around. As she waited for the end of her shift, Rachel quickly changed clothes and dashed home, anxious about how the children had spent the day. She hoped that if Henry hadn't called her, everything was all right. Upon entering the apartment, she was greeted by the smell of pancakes. The children rushed out of their rooms, looking clean and full. It seemed that their guest had already fed and bathed them. Rachel was shocked to see this. "You're a real magician, Martha," Henry exclaimed, proudly carrying little Ethan in his arms. "Mom, he's feeling better. He doesn't have a fever anymore." Rachel placed her hand on Ethan's forehead and was surprised to find it no longer hot. "I made him a herbal compress. The syrup helped, but traditional medicine works even better," Martha explained. "I don't even know what to say," Rachel said, bewildered. "I expected there would be clutter and chaos." "Is that what you wanted to say?" Martha asked. "Well, not quite like that, but something similar," Rachel nodded. "Now that I look around, I can't believe my eyes." "Don't be surprised. I promised everything would be fine," Martha said, bowing her head. "Sit at the table and try it. The children have already eaten, but if they want more, there's enough for everyone." Rachel couldn't hold back her tears as she hugged Martha tightly. "You're my guardian angel." Those words felt like a soothing balm to Martha's soul. Once they calmed down, the women sat at the table to enjoy tea and pancakes. The pancakes were so delicious that Rachel lost track of how quickly she devoured them. 5 in just a couple of minutes. After satisfying her hunger, she hesitantly asked, "Excuse me for asking, but how did you end up in this situation?" "You know, Rachel, I don't really have much to tell you," Martha replied. "I barely remember anything. I woke up in a ditch without documents or money. That was 6 months ago. There was a wound on my head, and I could hardly stand." "Were there no other people around?" Rachel asked, placing her hands over her face in sympathy. "Why would there be?" Martha shrugged. "Some vagrants found me and took me to their shack. They gave me clothes because mine were in tatters. You know how long I lay in that ditch? So, I put on what they gave me. I had no other choice. I can't even remember how it all happened." "Did you try going to the police?" Rachel pressed on. "Are you kidding?" Martha replied, annoyance creeping into her voice. "I went there, explained my situation, and they didn't even take a statement. I don't understand why they stopped protecting people here." Rachel was taken aback. "A local police officer told me I was getting in the way of helping decent people." "Tell me, Rachel, am I an indecent person unworthy of respect?" The elderly woman burst into tears, and Rachel handed her a handkerchief. "No, that's not true. You're a good person," she reassured Martha. "You just happened to cross paths with a heartless police officer." "Maybe that's why I left without any help," Martha said, shaking her head. "I feel sorry for you. You were just a victim of circumstance. And as for the police, there's always a rusty bolt in the mechanism." Deep down, Rachel not only felt sympathy, but also outrage that no one had helped Martha. The woman had lost her memory and found herself sidelined in life. After thinking for a moment, Rachel suggested, "Stay with us. We have enough room, and the children seem happy to have you around." "Are you sure about that?" Martha asked cautiously. "I'm truly grateful to you, so I ask that you continue to stay after the children." Rachel insisted. "I work shifts as a hospital orderly, and unfortunately, my kids are often left alone." "Okay, I understand and I agree. Especially since I have nowhere else to go," Martha replied. Her face lit up with a joyful smile, relieved she could escape inhumane conditions and wouldn't have to waste time searching for food. After discussing the details, Rachel continued working calmly at the hospital. Although Dr. Caldwell still tried to pursue her, Rachel wanted nothing to do with him, so she avoided him whenever possible. One day, Lydia asked Rachel, "So, how's your homeless woman doing? Has she stolen anything else from your apartment?" "Oh my God, Where do you get these ideas? Rachel responded, feeling annoyed. We're getting along just fine. I've never met anyone before who could help like that. Nothing surprising. There are people like that everywhere, Lydia shrugged. Well, name one person who has helped you. Rachel suggested. Lydia hesitated, struggling to come up with an answer. See? It's unlikely anyone would help unless there's a direct benefit for them, Rachel remarked. You know, my friend, you're right, Lydia agreed. I apologize for giving you a hard time about that beggar. Her name is Martha, and she's like a mother to me, Rachel corrected her. Let's not discuss this poor woman's life anymore. Life has already brought her to rock bottom. Let's not gossip about her. Okay, Lydia conceded. I'll keep quiet. Excellent. Now, let's get to work, Rachel said, patting Lydia on the shoulder as they moved on to their duties. This conversation marked the last time Lydia picked on Martha. Instead, she became interested in Martha's well-being and what she was up to. It seemed that Rachel's colleague also felt compassion for her, especially since Rachel shared that Martha had lost her memory. Lydia even started passing things to Rachel for her guest. Lydia's mother had passed away 6 months ago, leaving behind a lot of clothing. Lydia didn't want to throw it away, but now she had a chance to find a purpose for it. Martha welcomed Lydia and invited her over for tea and pie. No matter what, the elderly woman had a knack for cooking deliciously, though she couldn't remember where she acquired such skills. 3 weeks passed since Martha had entered Rachel's apartment. During this time, she had fully adapted to normal life. The children also grew accustomed to her and, oddly enough, began calling her grandma. They believed she had gone away for a while and then returned. Moreover, Rachel didn't feel the need to correct their assumptions. They lived as one big family. Meanwhile, Rachel couldn't shake the thought of Martha's memory loss. It was hard to believe she had no relatives. Someone had to be searching for this woman. However, Rachel had no idea who or where they might be, but she hoped to receive information soon. She reached out to 2 volunteers with a request to help search for Martha's relatives. Briefly explaining the situation, she provided photos from her phone. After seeing pictures of Martha, the volunteers promised to assist. They began their search and kept in touch with Rachel, but unfortunately, there wasn't much to share from the areas where homeless individuals typically gathered. No one recognized her from the photos they showed, and the homeless people only repeated the same phrase, "We don't know anything." It was surprising that Martha had spent so much time among them, yet they didn't remember her. Or perhaps they simply didn't want to get involved, fearing the police, especially since many of them had legal troubles, like lacking proper identification. The homeless didn't care about their own situations, but law enforcement could certainly take an interest in them. That's why they were reluctant to engage. Meanwhile, the search continued, with the volunteers promising to do everything they could. Rachel also tried to find information using social media and other online resources. Martha observed her efforts and sighed. I don't think anything will come of this. If I had loving relatives, they would have shown up by now. I'll still try to look for them if you don't mind, Rachel continued. Of course, I'm all for it, but I'm sorry to bother you, Martha said, feeling guilty. Get rid of those gloomy thoughts, Rachel commanded gently. You're not bothering anyone. Just look at how cheerful the kids have become since you showed up. It's just a fairy tale, not reality, Martha replied. Nevertheless, Rachel continued her search, which soon became known at work. While Lydia supported her, many other employees joked about it, and some even made gestures at their temples, implying she was losing her mind for helping a beggar. She's just an ordinary woman facing life's challenges, Rachel tried to explain. You don't understand anything about this, so don't judge, and you won't be judged, she asserted. Most of the team, except for Lydia, believed that Martha was just manipulating Rachel and urged her to send Martha to a shelter instead. But Rachel was not the type to give up when faced with difficulties. She firmly believed she could find Martha's relatives. Dr. Caldwell's advances only pushed Rachel closer to a breakdown. She had no time for romantic games. He simply wouldn't take no for an answer. One day, she finally responded to him sharply. Why don't you just go away? I have enough problems without you pestering me. What's wrong with you? You have a wife, so go bother her. As for this situation, Martha is just as human as anyone else, including you. And her problems are my problems. I'll show you, the doctor snarled, trying to grab her. At that moment, other employees began gathering in the corridor, drawn by the commotion. They were shocked to witness a confrontation between the doctor and the orderly. What? Are you all here? Don't you have work to do? Dr. Caldwell yelled at them. You should shout louder so the patients can hear you, Rachel replied sarcastically. Anyway, you're not working here anymore, he concluded. I'm firing you. Pack up and get out. Fine, as you wish. The employees were left speechless, whispering among themselves. They hadn't anticipated this outcome. Everyone had hoped the head doctor would calm down and that the conflict would resolve itself peacefully. But no, he went all in and fired Rachel. She collected her pay and left the hospital without saying goodbye. Afterward, she visited Lydia, who was shocked to hear what had happened. She had been in another building at the time. I just can't believe he did that, Lydia said. It's okay. I'll make it through, Rachel reassured her. I'll find another job, maybe try some private clinics. Don't worry, I won't disappear. I've been through worse. Life doesn't stand still. You're an optimist, Lydia said, surprised. Sometimes I amaze myself too, Rachel smiled. Not long ago, when Michael died, I didn't know how to carry on. It felt like the whole world had turned dark and the earth was upside down. You can't imagine what it's like to be left alone with 3 children to care for. But it's okay. The key is not to lose heart. Rachel winked and walked out of the hospital building. She no longer felt tied to that place. It was a shame that her work experience had been interrupted, but she had a whole pile of problems that needed urgent attention. Recently, the volunteers had informed her they had found a lead. They provided Rachel with the address of someone believed to be Martha's son. However, Brandon lived 100 kilometers away in a neighboring city. Rachel wondered why he hadn't been able to find his mother. Well, we don't know. We just happened to run into him, one of the volunteers explained. The thing is, we also collaborate with animal shelters. Brandon came there to ask what to do with his cat. She missed her owner and wouldn't give anyone peace. I don't understand what a cat has to do with any of this, Rachel asked. The cat belongs to Martha, Nathan explained at the shelter. Brandon shared his troubles with one of our employees. That's how we learned that he was Martha's son. Here's Brandon's address. Go and tell him the good news. We didn't do it ourselves because we thought you'd want to surprise him. That will definitely be a surprise, Rachel agreed. Thank you. I owe you one. The volunteers shrugged, expressing their interest in participating in the search. Rachel took the piece of paper with Brandon's address, but didn't tell anyone just yet. She needed to ensure that he was indeed Martha's son. After learning about the shelter and the cat, Rachel couldn't shake the suspicion that Brandon might have been involved in his mother's disappearance. If he wanted to get rid of a cat, it wouldn't be difficult for him to send a person to the other side as well. Regardless, speculating wouldn't help. Rachel set off to meet Brandon. Before leaving, she instructed Martha, "Don't spoil them with sweets too much or they'll get used to it." "Are you leaving for long?" Martha asked cautiously. "I think just today." "Well, maybe 2 days." "No more," Rachel replied thoughtfully. Martha came out to bid farewell to the children, hugging them and smiling at them. Rachel then headed to the station to catch the first train to the neighboring city and soon arrived at the address. It was a 3-story house that looked like a palace. Rachel had never seen such beauty before. Shivering as if it were cold outside, she approached the door and rang the bell. A few minutes later, footsteps echoed and a man in his 30s appeared at the doorstep. He looked at Rachel, then nodded, as if asking who she was and what she wanted. For a few seconds, Rachel was at a loss for words, but then she pulled out some photos from her bag. The homeowner was shocked when he saw the pictures. "Where did you get this? Where is my mother?" His hand shook. She's fine. She's with me, Rachel replied. But I'm curious about how Martha ended up in another city. Let's talk inside, Brandon invited her. As Rachel stepped inside, she was even more surprised. The exterior beauty was just the tip of the iceberg. The interior of the house was even more luxurious, adorned with antique furniture and paintings and marble tiles on the floor. Noticing the guest's astonishment, Brandon said cautiously, "This is all that's left of my father. He was an antique dealer." "I see," Rachel nodded. "I assumed you were the one who purchased it all." "No, I'm just an ordinary middle-class businessman," he waved his hand. "My father did what he loved, while I focused on business." "All of this is impressive, of course." Rachel shifted the topic. "But I just can't understand how your mother disappeared." "It happened 6 months ago," Brandon began his story. "I bought my mom a ticket to the sea. She had wanted to go for a long time, but soon after she left, she vanished. I didn't hear from her, and I didn't know what to do." "Did you try to find her?" Rachel asked. "Of course. I traveled all over the city, but with no results," Brandon nodded. "It's strange that, with your resources, you couldn't find your mother," Rachel said thoughtfully. "Don't be fooled by the luxury," Brandon replied. "I understand," Rachel nodded. "Get ready. We'll go to your mother's place. Maybe she'll remember something." "I hope so," Brandon said. "What's wrong with her memory?" he asked, horror creeping into his voice. "I don't know. Maybe she has amnesia from the hits," Rachel shrugged. "Oh my God. After a hit, you usually stop talking. We need to go to her right now." "But I need 1 more minute to call Sabrina and let her know I'm heading out," Brandon said, preparing to call. "Sabrina? Who's she, if it's not a secret?" Rachel inquired. "Well, she's kind of my fiancée," Brandon answered hesitantly. "Kind of?" Rachel asked, raising an eyebrow. "You see, we still can't get married," Brandon replied, frustration evident in his voice. "First my mother disappeared, then other problems came up. I decided there would be no wedding until my mother is found." "You could have married by now, especially since so much time has passed," Rachel pointed out. "Let's not talk about my fiancé right now. What matters most to me is seeing my mom," Brandon said. An hour later, they arrived back in Rachel's hometown. As they approached her apartment, Rachel quietly asked, "Are you ready?" "Yes," Brandon replied, and Rachel opened the door. A few seconds later, Martha appeared in the corridor. Upon seeing her, Brandon shouted from the apartment, "Mom, you're alive!" "Rachel, is this my son?" Martha asked, confused, and tears began streaming down her face. "Yes, it's him," Rachel replied. "It can't be. My dear son, I don't believe it." Martha continued to cry. "It's me, Mom. Brandon, your own son." He reached out his arms, trying to hug her. Martha didn't push him away and embraced him as well. Rachel had expected the reunion to be more subdued, given Martha's memory issues, but the reality turned out to be quite different. Martha burst into tears upon recognizing her son and exclaimed, "Exactly. I remembered. It's your fiancé who's guilty." "I don't understand." "What do you mean?" Brandon asked, surprise etched on his face. Wait, I don't feel well." Martha waved her hands, beginning to lean against Brandon and Rachel as she caught her breath. Looking at them with tear-filled eyes, she said, "It was a mistake, son, getting involved with her. I knew something bad would happen." The stress of meeting her son triggered a flood of memories from that unfortunate day. It turned out that Martha had indeed planned to go to the sea. She wanted to relax on the warm sand and soak up the sun. Brandon had bought her a ticket and booked a lovely hotel just a couple of minutes' walk from the beach, thinking he was giving her a wonderful gift. However, the source of all her troubles was Brandon's fiancée. It was she who had incited her acquaintances to get rid of Martha. They didn't just hit her on the head from behind. It was Sabrina who orchestrated the entire thing. "Leave Sabrina out of this. Don't interfere with her and Brandon," Martha insisted. "Are you serious?" Brandon asked, horrified. "Yes. As strange as it sounds, your Sabrina wanted to kill me," Martha nodded. The elderly woman continued, explaining how she had been against their relationship from the start. Martha had seen through Sabrina's intentions, which is why she insisted they sign a prenuptial agreement. At the time, Brandon had been skeptical about the necessity of such formalities, but his mother convinced him it would be wise, and eventually he agreed. Sabrina, however, had categorically refused to sign it. After that, Martha went to the sea and disappeared. "I knew your relationship wouldn't end well," she concluded her story. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Brandon cried. "I was blind as a kitten. I didn't see anything happening around me." Later, Brandon called his friends and demanded they confront his ex-fiancée, revealing all the information about the attempted murder of his mother. Under pressure, she confessed everything and named her accomplices. They were soon arrested, and during the investigation, they admitted that the entire scheme had been planned by Sabrina. It was she who had persuaded them to keep an eye on Martha at the nearest station and eliminate her. When Martha got off at the station to enjoy some fresh evening air, they chose their moment. They struck her, but someone scared them off. They dumped Martha's body into a ditch, took her documents and money, and fled, hoping to cover their tracks in case anything went wrong. However, they informed Sabrina that the job was done and received payment from her. Brandon was shocked to learn all of this. Martha soon fully regained her memory and was able to realize that her son had been hoping and waiting for her all this time. Half a year had passed. Brandon started a relationship with Rachel, especially since his mother approved. Before long, he proposed to her. The news brought tears of joy to Martha's eyes. "I agree to become your wife. Let's enjoy our time together until the end of our days." Even the pigeons took flight and circled overhead at the sound of her voice, a good omen signaling that two loving hearts had found each other. Rachel's children and Martha watched from the sidelines. Martha had truly become the children's grandmother. She approached Rachel and Brandon, blessing their union. A month later, they got married, and Rachel and the children began preparing to move into Brandon's house. However, Rachel still had a debt to settle in her hometown. Brandon was surprised when Rachel asked him to take her to the hospital where she had been fired. With ease, Rachel found Dr. Caldwell, who was making his rounds among the patients. Without hesitation, she began to tell him everything she thought of him and what she believed he deserved. To his misfortune, his wife was at the hospital this time and heard every word. What happened next is hard to describe. "Henry," Dr. Caldwell searched for a place to hide from his enraged wife, who still managed to give him an earful. It was a good thing he survived such a quarrel, as he suddenly lost all desire to flirt on the side. With that business wrapped up, Rachel and her children left the city to begin their new life.